Thanks for tuning in to From Nothing, where we go deep on how healthcare founders actually got started. I'm Patrick Haig, and today my co-host Ian Sefferman and I are joined by Nate Maslak, co-founder and CEO of Ribbon Health. Ribbon is on a mission to use data to power every care decision to be convenient, cost-effective, and high quality. Today we talk about how Nate's career and personal experiences set him up to start Ribbon, how he and his co-founder Nate Fox weaved their way from a consumer-facing product, landing their first customers during YC, to a B2B company, fundraising from investors who truly believe versus trying to persuade, how he lucked into his first health plan customer, and more. If you like startup rides, this is a great startup ride. We hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, so thank you, Nate. We have Nate Maslak from Ribbon Health joining us today on this episode of From Nothing. Good to see you, Nate.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Just to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and give Ribbon Health's elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with Ribbon because I think it's more important, and then I can get into myself after. So Ribbon is an enterprise API layer for the healthcare industry. Our vision as a company is to power every care decision to be convenient, cost-effective, and high quality. So the basic thesis of the company is that anywhere where a care decision is being made digitally, which I would argue at this point is in some way or another everywhere, there's a need for accurate information on the care delivery, typically the provider, the doctor, and Ribbon provides that. So we sit behind the scenes of a lot of different care decisions, and we work across health insurance companies. We work with provider organizations and telemedicine companies and hospital systems, and also with patient-facing solutions to be able to power those care decisions. And our product enables those care decisions by basically distributing data via an API. So within our API, you'll see accurate and comprehensive information on a doctor or a provider. So where they're practicing, the industry jargon term is provider directory, but really that means like, where are they? How can I reach them? An area where the industry has really struggled historically. The average directory is under 50% accurate, which certainly shouldn't be. Second, which insurance plan a given doctor accepts, down to the plan name and network level. Third, the cost and quality of care that provider is delivering. And fourth, that provider's focus area. So is this a doctor who is an orthopedic surgeon who does knee replacement surgeries or hip replacement surgeries? And do they do them on patients like me, or maybe on a totally different type of patient? With the entire goal of making sure that when somebody's looking for a doctor, and it might be in a referral within a provider setting, or it might be within an online search or through an employee's health benefit, that they're able to find the right provider for them and make the most informed decision. So it's a little bit on the what we're doing. I'm happy to get into the specific problem. Also happy to give a little bit of a background on me, whatever you think is best.
Yeah, we'd love your background.
Cool. So my background, I was born in Russia. I lived there for the first 8 years of my life, and then I immigrated here with my mom. We moved to the Cleveland area, which becomes important in this kind of quest on healthcare because Cleveland is nothing if not healthcare and sports. And so I grew up there until I went to college. I went to school at WashU in St. Louis, and I studied economics, and I also studied healthcare management. Again, kind of inadvertently putting myself in a situation where healthcare was going to be surrounding my life. WashU is an amazing pre-med program, and a lot of the school really focuses on that as well. So after I graduated, I took a job with McKinsey and Company in Chicago. And when I joined, I started to do primarily healthcare work. Kind of fell into it again by accident, but for about 2 years was really focused around growth strategy in healthcare, which at the time was heavily focused around the transition to value-based care. How do health plans start to think about value-based care? How do provider organizations think about that and compete in that environment? And how do they actually drive value for the patient? Coolest project that I worked on was helping redesign the state Medicaid system for the state of Arkansas, which was McKinsey's kind of first time doing work like that. And I really focused around patients with behavioral health disorders and how do you actually pay for their treatment and try to create incentives to drive high value, high quality outcomes in that. It was really eye-opening in just how important thinking about these incentive structures were. Also eye-opening in how far behind healthcare was as an industry in terms of thinking about data and analytics. And kind of observing that, I started to really think that I needed to go and learn how to apply better technological principles to these problems, because these problems were so important. And we're literally running Excel pivot tables, trying to figure out and crunch like all this data across how people are being treated. And I to this day maintain that that's not the best way to do it. So I left after 2 years and I joined a company in the advertising technology space called Datalogics. And I joined right around or right between our Series A and Series B. And I joined and ended up building out our identity graph business and product there. And that was really a fascinating learning in terms of how other industries, who I think were quite a world ahead of where healthcare was at the time in terms of applying analytics and data principles to kind of real-time learnings. So I spent about 3 years there. Within that time, Datalogics grew like wildfire. We went from a Series A company to an over $1 billion acquisition to Oracle. I got to Oracle, realized that maybe my working style was not super conducive to how Oracle conducts their business. And I took off. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I just gotten into business school. And so I figured I would go to kind of try to think of what's next. And I was very fortunate to have met my co-founder there in the very first month of business school. We started riffing on a bunch of different ideas, but through some personal experiences, ended up actually really honing in on the care navigation problem, which is where I think Ribbon still lives. It's how do you actually help people get the care that they need? It started in a slightly different iteration, but then through that led us to Ribbon.
Okay, that's awesome. I definitely want to dive into that point. So kind of going from, and your co-founder's name is Nate, correct?
Correct. We're both Nates, which is confusing for everyone but us.
Yeah. Do you have nicknames that you refer to each other with? So make it
his last name is Fox, which is a pretty cool call sign. So he goes by that.
All right, that's clarifying. So when you met Nate Fox, can you kind of tell the story from that first spark to actual incorporation, including kind of like that first iteration that's not exactly what it is today?
Yeah, definitely. So when Nate and I met, we bonded over an interest in like data-driven startups. Nate also was coming out of the ad tech environment. He was a software engineer at a company called Unify. And he was a data engineer and he was using Datalogics data to build new products. And so we just started talking about that and started whiteboarding different ideas together, just kind of thinking about different spaces. And at first it started out as just like a fun thought exercise, but also a little bit of like, how well do we work together? Would we be good co-founders? And I think that was more like an academic exercise. But as we started to go through that, we also started to kind of bond and share our stories and like how we grew up. And there's a moment when we were talking about kind of two different healthcare experiences that we had faced that really hit us on the head of like how the world should and shouldn't operate. So on one side, my mom had kind of right before I started business school, needed help finding a provider. And she was having joint pain. It wasn't super serious, but it was serious enough that it was starting to affect her life. And we started trying to figure out how do we kind of navigate the healthcare system. This goes back to kind of the pieces that I mentioned about my background, but I was at McKinsey in the Midwest, kind of working with large hospital systems. And so it was fairly connected to that. So it's already kind of like one point of privilege. Second, we were in Cleveland, one of the best healthcare markets in the world, another point of privilege. And then third, having gone to WashU, half of my friends are doctors. And a third point of privilege. And I was like, if there's anybody who can help navigate healthcare, it is I. And so my mom and I started trying to figure out who the right provider was for her to go see for joint pain, and she ended up going to a provider who was probably a really good doctor, but was not a holistic joint pain doctor. She was a back specialist, and my mom did not have back pain. And in order to confirm that she in fact did not have back pain, they did tests and MRIs and other imaging to see that she did not have back pain. And then off she went, referred to another provider who specialized in knee pain and then elbow pain and every other type of specialized joint that you can imagine. And after a few months, she'd incurred thousands of dollars of medical bills. She was heavily underinsured and was really at a point where she had to pull out of the system because she was at risk of a pretty catastrophic financial event. And so she pulled out. And witnessing this moment and kind of feeling helpless in terms of what we could do was really eye-opening, because I do think that we came in at a much more advantaged position than most people did navigating this. Now, I juxtapose that with my co-founder's experience, where Nate was born clinically deaf and was completely at hearing loss up until the age of 3. And his parents kind of caught that early, and they were able to navigate the system, and his family was able to help them navigate the system, and they were able to navigate different resources within their schools and everything else that they could do. And if you were to interact with Nate today, you would have no idea. And I think that that's really magical, right? If you think about something that is as serious as full hearing loss, and to be able to hear, um, because you can navigate the healthcare system, that's a really astonishing event to be able to pull through. And Nate and I were talking about that. We're like, this is insane. Like, this is insane that in the same healthcare industry and healthcare market, you can go from not being able to hear to being able to hear, but at the same time, you can't like figure out how to treat joint pain until you're almost bankrupt. Like that can't, those two worlds shouldn't coexist together. So how do we start to bridge that? And that's really where the pain point around care navigation came up. And we didn't really know that this was a whole industry yet. But what we did know is that when we were trying to navigate healthcare, there was like all this stuff online, and some of it was total garbage. It was completely bogus. It was like ad infested, and it was there clearly to sell you ads. And coming from ad tech, we're like, we know why this website exists. And then there was other stuff that was really helpful, but it's hard to differentiate what is helpful, what is not. So the first iteration, since we want to get super tactical around this, I'll go through like the parts I usually skip on the 0 to 1. The first iteration was like basically a Reddit thread around what resources are out there, and what we found helpful and what we didn't find helpful. And then we started to see like what our friends clicked on, and we're literally just like linking to stuff. And then we're like, oh, cool, our friends like this. And then we iframed some of the sites, and then people started using it as like a platform of sorts, right? It wasn't a platform at all, but you could just click on the same things. And through that, we're like, what if there's a better way to guide that? And as we dug deeper and deeper into the industry, we discovered companies like Accolade, which is an amazing company that really provides these care navigation services in a really high touch basis. And by the way, I still maintain that like this is a services problem as much as it is a technology problem, but I think it needs to be both. And one of our hypotheses was that companies that are providing these really high touch services could really only do so in like large employer settings where the fixed cost could be allocated across a bunch of different people. And if you are somebody that works for, I don't know, a nail salon like my mom did, those services weren't available to you. So how can we build something that maybe wasn't quite as good, but was good enough, but that was a lot more scalable and digital first that could help people navigate their care? So that was the core thesis. And we named the kind of incorporation company HealthWiz, which nobody could understand on a telephone call. And I really don't recommend that people have like Z endings to their names if they're trying to sell into employers, because everyone was like HealthWise. People thought we were a urine analysis test, which caused brand confusion. But in spite of that, we were able to kind of get to a point where we were able to sign up our first few employers. And we had done this basically right around the time that we had graduated. We'd got into Y Combinator, and YC was really instrumental in kind of helping push us to be like, think like, just get people using the thing, and not just like the consumers that you can distribute it to for free, but go see if you can find a few paying customers that are tiny, 20, 30, 40 person employers, as you kind of think about going up market and validate that this might work for a small self-insured employer as well. So that was kind of the journey from a consumer side project to then an incorporated company that we took into YC when we graduated.
Okay, so HealthWiz, as far as I understand it at this point, was a collection of resources that was easily digestible from like a consumer perspective to help them kind of navigate like where to, like the main use case was, where can I find a specific type of doctor?
It was ultimately trying to drive towards that. So the thesis was that first you have to get engagement, and everything that we had heard as we started to try to understand why haven't things like this worked before, people would say like nobody uses them. And so thesis one was, how do you get people to use the thing? And then once you have their attention, how do you start to guide their care to a cost-effective, high-quality, and convenient place? And that was always the vision of the company, by the way. We've never changed that. It's always been power every care decision to be convenient, cost-effective, and high quality. And so we had a symptom checker at the kind of start of the process, because they're very engaging. People like to use them, especially if they don't feel well. We had done some partnerships to kind of have that up and running within our solution. We had condition content that we were pulling in from many different sources. We had a cost estimator. But all of this was really meant to be able to say, like, if you're not feeling well, you can use our tool to kind of help find the right provider for you. And that's what we're taking to market, which is kind of this like one-stop shop for when you're sick and you don't know what to do.
Yeah. So then You had mainly consumers using it at this point, before YC.
Before YC, yeah. And then during YC, we signed up our first three employers for a whopping $70 of monthly recurring revenue.
And can you describe these types of employers?
Yeah. So they were small tech companies.
Okay.
And we knew that ultimately that wasn't the market that we really wanted to focus on, because the pain point is so much more acute in other environments where people are less affluent, less healthy. But we knew we needed to get going somewhere, and we knew that we needed to start to build around a set of power users first. And so literally just knocking on doors and making phone calls. And we were in the Bay Area at the time for YC. And so it was like literally just like in the offices of HR administrators at like a 60-person startup, being like, here's why you should use this product. And I was, not knowing this was probably like, person number 17 in their office that week pitching probably a very similar solution.
And were these largely network driven introductions that at least got your foot in the building and then it was on you to pitch?
A little bit of everything. So I don't believe in like true cold outreach where you just kind of like hit up 1,000 people with the same message, but there was a fair amount of highly, highly targeted cold outreach. And it might have been something like, hey, I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you're a fan of so-and-so band, or that you studied this in college and I have like a particular passion about that. And like, now that I have your attention, like maybe you'll let me into your office and we can talk about Def Leppard for 20 minutes, but for 10 minutes, let me like explain to you this company that I'm trying to build. And people were really receptive to that. So that's probably like the only cold outreach that ever worked for us. Otherwise, it was network driven introductions. I basically just went through my entire LinkedIn and I was like, who do I know who's going to be connected to people who might be decision makers, which at a 20-person startup frequently is one of the founders. And we're finding that folks who had kind of just recently hit exit velocity from the part of the journey that we were on had a lot of empathy for that moment. In the same way that like, we're always down to talk to like new founders because there's so much empathy for that and like the pain and the struggle and the hustle. So folks appreciated that. And so they were willing to take a chance on us. And three of them were willing to take a chance enough to roll it out to their whole employer base. Two were folks, one was warm, one was kind of warm, and then one was totally cold and was also going to be the kind of the hardest challenge that we would have had.
And was that one that was cold? Was that the Def Leppard closing that, at least getting your foot in the door?
I don't remember if it was Def Leppard or something else. I feel like I found a lot of shared interest with people in those 2 months, but it was something like that. Yeah. And I remember we met like outside of their offices somewhere in Soma, and I was like, I gave probably like my best investor pitch of all time in that moment. And I was like, here's everything we're going to try to do. And here's what it's going to be for your organization. And he was like, what do you have? And I was like, we have this like kind of shitty app that doesn't really work, but it's going to get better. And they'd actually been a former YC company, and we didn't even know that when we had reached out. And so there was like an element of like, I remember this moment in the hustle, and like, yeah, let's try it out.
So can you walk us through that first rollout to all these employees? Because like engagement, right, is that number one thing. Like we want to make sure that you're actually using this.
Yep.
How did you try to optimize for that, even when you're rolling out to like a 20-person company?
Yeah, we said that we will do everything in our power to make sure that people download the thing, sign up for the thing, use the thing the first time. And then from there, the product needed to speak for itself. So we asked all the different folks at the companies who we knew or had kind of gotten to know at that point. We were like, what do you think is going to be most like enticing for your employees to come in and talk to us for 10 minutes? And one was like, a lot of people at this company like nice whiskey. So like I came in with a couple of bottles of whiskey, and which is very funny for a healthcare company. We bought tissue boxes and bought branded stickers that said like, if you need this, you probably need our app, and a bunch of just like little things. But we were like, we're going to do this better than any company has ever done it before within this 120-person startup. Like we know that the other, I don't know, TriNet or JustWorks, like they don't have time to do things like this. So we were like, they're never going to forget HealthWiz. And then we also said like, we'll help you enroll in health insurance. Like we'll like kind of demonstrate, we'll answer whatever questions we can. And we're like, we're not a licensed broker, but like happy to share whatever free advice. And almost everybody came up. I think at some point they were like, who are these guys? Like, this is crazy. I need to just go talk to them to figure out like, are they fully unhinged, or are they just like working really hard to get this going?
I love that. Like the amount of creativity there. I've heard of like napkin dispensers being used to get people to like adopt an open enrollment, but I love the whiskey tasting. Yes, not very aligned with healthcare, but also sounds highly effective. Um, so you mentioned like these types of customers, Bay Area startups, they felt the early adopter pain, so they were like, I'm willing to throw in and get you there. How did you move from there to, it sounds like your target customer evolved and you always knew it was going to evolve. Like, how did you make the
Yep.
leap to the next phase?
Yeah. So I don't know if we ever actually ended up making the leap before we shifted direction, but we were in the process of doing so, and we were really trying to figure out what is the value prop for 1,000-person self-insured employer, and how can we demonstrate that value prop with really very little to prove, right? They needed to see that we had something in market, but beyond that, we didn't have a ton. And what we were finding is that we needed to show immediate ROI, not like we will be able to show savings in the next 12 months, which I'm very confident we would have been able to, just because if you have nothing, if you have no care navigation solution and people just are lost, like one emergency room visit avoided per 1,000 people would have probably gotten them 10 to 20x ROI in a solution like us and what we were charging. And people believe that, but you can't impress like your leadership team with ROI 12 months from now. And so we started trying to figure out like, what does this displace? What are they already doing? What are they already using that this could potentially help them get away from that maybe they don't like doing? And maybe it's like manual things. So one thing that we said was, hey, you know, all those questions you got from your employees around like why this doctor is in network or out of network, forward it to us. And we made a concierge@.com email. And our concierges were my co-founder and me, just like answering emails, taking phone calls. So we kind of found that there's this personal pain point that the benefits administrator was feeling that they wanted to do away with. And their time is really valuable. And they're typically at a company like this, when you have one, maybe two people thinking about HR holistically, you know, benefits is a part of that. Healthcare benefits is a part of that, but it's a disproportionate amount of time spent. And so we found that to be a valuable thing to just be able to outsource. The second piece was thinking about what are the other solutions that they might be using that they really just don't need to use if they have something like this. And so we started asking the question. We said, like, how are you solving this today? Like, what are the tools available for your employees? What works? What doesn't? Are they engaged? Are they not? And we actually got into contracting with multiple multi-thousand life employers that you would have heard of. And we were going through the legal process. We found that there was a lot of value in private equity backed companies because they saw a lot of value in high incentives to demonstrate like immediate cost savings plus think about what else you can build. So we started reaching out to private equity firms and trying to get connected with the partners of these PE funds to see if they would distribute us. And we got some distribution from that. But as all of this was happening, on the other side, for our existing customers, people were using the product. We actually had 90% month over month engagement for the like 3 or 4 months that we were in market. And short window, so probably would have gone down, but still we came out hot. And we made sure that everybody loved the product. And then they became really engaged and really angry and stopped loving the product. And the reason was that they were actually using it to try to book care and to try to find care. And people were calling. We used to get feedback like, I was able to get my husband to go see a doctor for the first time in 5 years. Like, thank you so much, team. And that flipped to, hey, we called that doctor and that doctor wasn't there. The phone number was wrong. The address was wrong. I showed up at a bank, not the provider's office, but it was the right address. But where's the doctor? We had people telling us about doctors who had retired. We had one doctor who had passed away like 10 or 15 years ago, like of, probably peacefully, but it wasn't like some tragic thing that just happened. Like it was just outdated data. And we realized we had a really bad data problem in our hands. And we were like, we can't be the only ones thinking about this, right? Like other care navigation companies exist. And so we started trying to find other infrastructure solutions. And there was very little. We were using a public government data set called NPES, which a lot of folks still use in the industry today. We called 100 doctors and we found that less than half of them had accurate information there. And then, did a little bit of Googling and turns out it's actually a massive industry problem. And there's a big pain point and people talk about it. And so we felt like we had to solve the problem ourselves for our product. And we found that if we had 3 pieces of information on a doctor instead of one, we as people had an easier time kind of triaging and trying to figure out, is this the right address or not? Or which one is the most likely to be right or not? And then we said, what if we had 10 sources? And so we scraped a little bit of data, we downloaded a couple of other data sets, and turns out it worked. And then we were like, well, like we've been calling doctors, we have a truth set of information. We can probably build a very light, like if then function that looks at all these different combinations to figure out what is more or less likely to be right. And turns out it worked and it was more accurate. And so we started making noise about this, like when we were like doing these like demo pitches. It was like, look at like these 10 startups you've never heard of. And everyone else was talking about like engagement metrics. And I was like, our phone numbers are accurate. Our addresses are accurate. And we started having some of our competitors come up to us asking us where we're getting that information. And we realized that everybody else who was kind of coming up at the same time was also struggling with this. And that is just a ludicrous thing to have to think about when you are trying to get people to use your product. We're actually trying to get people the healthcare that they need in moments of vulnerability. And on the back end, you're like literally trying to Google a doctor and find like 7 different sources to try to figure out like, are they actually at this hospital or not? And if I send a patient there, are they going to get rerouted to the really expensive hospital system instead? So one of them was like, can we buy it? And we were like, sure. And we spun up an API. And it had nothing to do with like market sizing. It wasn't an intentional pivot. We just thought about the fact that there were patients like out there struggling with the exact same thing that the employees who were using our product were struggling with too. And as a company that's always been really mission driven, and we've always wanted to power as many care decisions as we can to be convenient, cost effective, and high quality, it was a no brainer. So we spun up an API almost overnight, and they started using it. And it was kind of cool. And by the way, our revenue had been 20x'd with that one agreement because it was a SaaS agreement. And we're like, okay, maybe there's something here. So then we started talking to other companies, and like pretty overwhelmingly in our just like user interviews and product interviews, people were like, oh, if you have this, we'll pay for it now. And so that was really eye-opening to see that pain point. Like I thought about like, driving up and down all over the bay, trying to get like a few people to use the thing that we had that actually was going to solve problems for them, but like having to convince them for that. And then having this thing that people were literally coming to us for that was going to give us broader distribution, get us in front of more people faster. And it was a no-brainer. So we started to sign a couple more, and then we were like, we should probably size the market. We should probably figure out like, is this a venture backable business or not? And again, turns out massive industry problem, huge amount of inefficiencies, huge amount of waste. We think that there's over $700 billion of waste in our healthcare system today that is addressable by the provider data problem. And so we said, yeah, we should go big in this direction. So we introduced our kind of existing employer customers to one of our new customers. And we said, hey, we're going to shift directions. We're no longer a care navigation tool. We're going to power other tools. Here are some options. And we went all out. I convinced one of my good friends from high school to quit his job in Chicago and move to New York. We had just moved to New York as well, to join us, and became our head of engineering, our first employee. And then we were off to the races.
Yeah, I was definitely going to ask, like, how did you transition off your existing customers? But what a beautiful handoff to hand them to your now new post-pivot customers, saying like they're going to take care of you. So this was post-YC. Had you raised money right before this point?
Not a ton. We had raised while we were in school from Rough Draft Ventures and Dorm Room Fund, which are a couple of small funds, student-run funds that focus on student-run startups. We had raised money from YC, and then we really started to think heavily about this kind of shift in direction, like a week before demo days when all of this started happening, and like folks were like, we will pay. And so we did demo day with like the employer care navigation business, because I didn't want to get up there and be like, do we have a surprise for you? Like, hate provider phone numbers. And I remember we would like test the concept with investors, and people would be like, what? Like, no, that's not a thing. That's not a real problem. And I think like the understanding of the problem has come a long way. And I think our team at Ribbon has done a large part of kind of helping drive an understanding of that. But at the time, it was not obvious. It was certainly not obvious to folks who were in a position where they were, able to invest in other startups at YC, to no fault of their own. But it's just not the kind of thing that is like top of mind. Yeah. So we were like, okay, we're not going to make total asses of ourselves. Like, we're going to go out there, we're going to pitch this to like employer business. We'll talk to some investors, but like be very honest. And we had also, right before demo day, had folks that we knew, who were ultimately taking a bet on Nate and me as founders. And we came to them about 3 weeks after demo day and we're like, hey, we're going to shift direction. We ended up not trying to fundraise off of this idea. And you have two options. Like, we'll give you your money back happily. Or if you want to buy in, we'll actually give you like a lower price on that, a lower kind of cap on the safe. And, we hope that you're going to be along for the ride. And we really hope you choose to stay. But like, we'll wire you the money right now if you want it back. And every single person was like, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't get why this is a problem, but like all in, get after it, which is awesome. And I think it was just really cool to see that support. So I guess at that point, that means that we were just south of 300K. And then once we got our first few customers, we actually had enough to be kind of what YC calls like ramen profitable, but we had enough cash flow that could keep us going for a bit. And then we felt like it was a good time to go out and start to have the conversations. And we raised pretty quickly at that point. And I think we had revenue to show. We started to be able to better articulate the pain point in the market and the thesis behind it. And that was plenty for us. So that was kind of the initial fundraising process.
During that fundraise, your post now, these few investors are like, keep the money, no idea what you're doing, but like, we're betting on you guys. When you're pivoting to now, I'm fundraising from other investors, what were the things that got them nodding the most? Especially realizing that the first cohort were like, is this even a problem? Like, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think honestly, probably the most important thing was seeing that other software companies were willing to pay for this. I think that demonstrates that they're having a problem more than anything else does, especially when you're selling into startups and you're able to get pretty meaningful contracts out of that. Like, we were a core part of their infrastructure. And so that was, I think, a big part of the story. I think the second piece was being a little bit more targeted with which investors we were going after. We were finding that some investors, we would be like, oh yeah, we're trying to solve this provider data problem. They'd be like, yeah, this is a massive problem. And we would talk about the how. There were others who basically didn't believe in the market, didn't believe that this problem existed. And I think one of my learnings in fundraising, from that and to date has been that you're not going to make someone a believer who's not a believer. I think you can convince somebody that it is a real problem by showing good data. But at the end of the day, if an investor's goal is to kind of explain to you why you are wrong, and that's their true motivation, as opposed to like the pressure testing and different people have different styles. But I think as a founder, like, you can start to tell pretty quickly when you're being pressure tested and when someone's like, no, like, I actually don't think this is a problem. And I think just being able to qualify that and politely not spending more time than you need to in those settings, in the same way that, in SaaS sales, you're taught to not spend time with customers for whom you're not going to solve a problem for.
Yeah. So then you were having a bunch of startups buying this, like paying for your API, and you had now fully sunsetted any kind of like UI driven HealthWiz product. How did you make the leap from, because I know today one of your customers is health plans.
Yep, that's right.
How did you make the leap from these? And could you actually describe these startups? Like, what were they doing? Just care navigation, and you were powering it with accurate data?
Yeah. They're doing care navigation. There was a third-party administrator. There was a telemedicine company. But all of them were trying to solve the same problem. They just talked about it in slightly different ways. And that was actually one of the big insights that hit us pretty hard. In order to get to those health plans, I think there was kind of a really important step that we took, which is when we were trying to validate that there was a market. And actually, before we went out to raise, we said, we're going to have 100 conversations in 30 days, and we're going to talk to the entire ecosystem. And some of them are going to be super awkward because we were like hustling to get these warm intros, and we're hitting up every connector. And we weren't trying to sell them anything. Genuinely, the goal was not to sell them HealthWiz, which became Ribbon Health. So I think we can start to think about like Ribbon as the API company. We weren't trying to sell them anything. We wanted to understand if this is a thing that they were even thinking about. And, for probably 50% of them, people were like, I don't understand what you're doing. And like, what is an API and why? And can't I just like, go to like website X to do this? And we were trying really hard to articulate the solution, which is also a good forcing mechanism for us to learn how to talk about it. The second outcome here was that there were a bunch of companies who were like, yeah, this is a real problem in the industry, and like somebody needs to solve it, and it hasn't really been solved in a way that we would expect. And here's some other people you should talk about that. And then there's a third bucket of people who were like, this is a pain point right now. Like I'm ready to buy. And that was a really startling thing because we were going in trying to do product interviews and user interviews and kind of like build empathy for the market. And through that started to get customers. And that's where we saw like across a diverse set of customers within those segments and subsegments where the pain points were most acute and where folks like kind of weren't really affected by it in any meaningful way.
Got it. And sorry, where did health plans fit? Which bucket did they fit in?
Almost every health plan we spoke with was like, this is a problem for our organization. And if you can solve it, that would be a meaningful thing for us to invest in. So I think the path to health plans started with third-party administrators because there are more of them. They tend to be a little bit smaller, a little bit more nimble. And as we started to validate the pain point with TPAs and we actually got our first third-party administrator customer, that's when we realized that health plans were having the exact same pain point and that we could solve it, and that we needed to invest in a better product to get to that place. And over time, we're able to get good enough for a certain subsegment of health plans and the really early innovators who love to buy new cool technologies and take chances to start to kind of take a chance on us. And we were able to sign our first, like what I would say, like health plan with covered lives and like a brand that you might have heard of, which is a regional health plan, about a year and 2 months into the pivot.
Okay, so you really first started working with TPAs, independent TPAs. They sounded like they did navigation a little bit in house. They're like, data it's terrible right now what we're consuming and using. They became Ribbon customers through proving the use case with them. They obviously had relationships with the health plans. And did you get introductions from TPAs to those health plans, and that's how you kind of?
We actually didn't. Our first health plan was targeted cold inbound. I was going through. I downloaded a list of there was like some government file of like who's like the IT administrator for some like tangibly related problem. And most of them were like, do not email at healthplan.com or like no reply at healthplan.com. But there was a handful where people wrote their emails and we were like, let's see what happens. Like maybe these are folks who actually like do want to be contacted for it. And so we started going through, started writing targeted emails. And one of them had forwarded our email. We didn't know. We didn't hear back from. We heard back from zero. Worst outbound campaign in Ribbon history. 0% response rate. And then one person followed up like 4 weeks later and was like, hey, I got this forwarded to me. I'm actually trying to solve this problem right now. I've done a full landscape of the market. I've never heard of you, but nothing else worked. And, can we have a call? And what he wanted to talk about was actually the how, the technology behind it. And we talked about this ML-driven approach that we're taking and being able to train it off of truth sets that other customers were contributing, which was really unique and new. And he was like, I'm a believer. Let's chat. Here's a contract. And he was like, this is my budget. And I was like, what if we charged you more? And he was like, if you do it in this budget, you have a deal and I will sign in the next week. If you don't do it in this budget, there is no deal. Like, we're not going to negotiate this. This is what I can afford. And he was actually being honest. I asked him when we met in person later, I was like, was there a room there? And he was like, nope. Like, that was the number. It was almost like an IT slush fund to try to think about this problem. So we signed that first customer and we learned so much about how big and hard this problem is in a health plan and how different it is from how like we as consumers think about it. Because health plans actually want to know bad data. They want us to flag all the pieces of the provider directory is inaccurate. Whereas if you're making a referral, you don't care about the 1,000 providers who don't do the thing or who are not where you think they are. You just want to find the one right match for the patient. For health planners thinking about this at such massive scale, they need to be able to cleanse their directory. They need to be able to think about how they design a network based on that and how they do outbound and outreach to new providers to put them in contract and what that means for value-based contracts. And do they have network adequacy? And that was one of those moments where we're like, provider data is not just a problem for, the three of us trying to find a doctor. This is a problem for virtually every part of the healthcare stack, right? If you can't figure out a provider's identity, then it doesn't really matter if they accept an insurance plan or not. There are tons of providers who accept an insurance plan at a practice that exists where they have literally never been. And so to you as a patient and to that health plan, by the way, that's not super valuable if they live 40 miles away and they just happen to be in network because of how a contract is designed. So all of that was really eye-opening. It helped us start to continue to refine the product. And what's really interesting around that is we talk a lot about network effects at Ribbon. We are a network effect driven business. Every single one of our customers gets a private copy of Ribbon data. They are editing it, they are using it, they're annotating it, they're tagging it. When a phone number is wrong and you're a referral coordinator, you're probably going to flag that. And so all of that comes back to us. And those are insights that we can use to improve our machine learning models. The other network effect, which isn't like a traditional, technological network effect where like the data is truly coming back, is getting all these insights across different customers because they all use the same product in slightly different ways, but they're all struggling with the same problem. And so how can we take insights from a health plan that we learned that we would have never gotten had we not spent time with that health plan? And how do we apply that to our product in a way that it could benefit a care navigation platform or a large telemedicine company? And there's a lot of those insights where we're like, yeah, I mean, we called the practice. They said that they accept this doctor's insurance plan, but the doctor's not there. Like, what does that mean? And so we started being able to better scrub that. And that has repercussions on both how we find care, but also how a health plan can think about if they have network adequacy or not, and if a regulator actually audits that network.
And how was the pitch of, hey, you're going to be using this data set, you get a private copy of the data set, but you're going to be using it. And unless you tell us otherwise, that's going to feed right back into the data set that everyone else is consuming. Did you hit any kind of sales friction on that?
A little bit, but I think we've always done it with a lot of empathy, and we've been very clear, like, we're not going to take anything that's proprietary and just go off and give it to somebody else. We're very respectful of that, and I think we really, really think hard about the level of security and trust that we need to help our customers develop, because we're a meaningful part of their infrastructure. And so we invest heavily on that front. The second piece is what we're really talking about: phone numbers, addresses. That's public domain information, and our customers are comfortable with that. Like, we've asked explicitly, we're like, "Do you care if this phone number goes?" And they're like, "No, it's not like, this isn't the thing that we want to compete over." Yeah. And I don't think that two different large hospitals want to compete over who's got the better phone number. They just want it all to work, and they'll compete over the things that make them special. Some of our customers are housing really important information that they need shown internally or maybe external, but only in certain places. And so they've built kind of their integrations around that. And we will never share that, and that will live in a private place. And that's actually why we made sure that everybody has a private copy of Ribbon data, as opposed to everyone's just mass editing one big data set, which has been really expensive for us. And it's a totally different technical problem, but it's been well worth it.
The first thing is, like, I love the getting an insurer or like a health plan on board in roughly 5 weeks, from cold email going out, 4 weeks of nothing. It's just bouncing around in the abyss. And then all of a sudden you get a contract within a week later.
Yep. Yeah. I would call that dumb luck more than anything else.
It only takes one.
Exactly.
Like, it only takes one. And then I know we're running up on time, Nate, but your story is like hugely important, I think, for aspiring healthcare founders, because it's a story, and really, like, yes, technology is the hero in this story because it has solved this really mucky data-driven problem. But your like creativity of bouncing and iterating your way through and then pivoting your way through, I think, is also really, really important for anybody coming through. Of like, you have to be very, very creative. And I think we often are thinking about, how do we get a hold of health plans? It's like, you just showed us a path, which is go get your hands dirty with government data sets and throw some darts at a board, more or less.
Yeah.
And you lucked out that way.
Yeah. And there's definitely survivorship bias, because we're not talking about the probably 100 things we did that, failed miserably. But, you talk about like technology, you talk about creativity. I think those two are really important. But I think actually the most important thing is empathy, like empathy for the human beings on the other side of a decision. I think I get a little bit frustrated when I hear of like new healthcare founders who are like, oh, like these systems or these plans, they just move so slowly and they're apathetic. And there's zero empathy for like, what about the human being on the other side who's really doing the best that they can and who's probably in an organization to better the lives of patients? Like, maybe, just maybe, you and the 37 other like startups that emailed them that week, maybe that's not a top priority for them right now. And maybe they have a different problem that they're trying to solve. And it's important to understand what those problems are, So in the same way, it's important for us as a company and as an industry to have deep empathy for the patient and think about like the human beings that we're trying to help first. We also need to be thinking about what are the problems that these people are trying to solve to better enable them to do their job to improve the patient experience too. And that I think has kind of been, at least for us, I think kind of like an advantage that we've had because we actually like we genuinely care and we try to hire people who genuinely care. And a shameless plug, Ribbon is hiring a lot. So for anyone listening who wants to join us, please do. But it really does come down to like, why are they slow? Like, why does a health plan take 6 months to go through legal? Well, like they're dealing with millions of people's lives. And so they should be a little bit slow on the legal side, as much as I would prefer that they not be. And there are times I find it frustrating. Like these systems are in place, at least for some reason. And so rather than try to just blow the whole thing up and say like, oh, we're just going to disrupt this, we're just going to blow up this entire system. The most disruptive companies are finding ways to disrupt the system in places where like people want it to change, but they're not just trying to like overhaul the entire thing because it's evolved and there's infrastructure and there are human beings who are negatively affected if the whole thing were to just explode altogether.
I think it's a good place to end. I like empathy as a final parting note. I think that's
love it.
That's really gracious. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys.
I have my two things written down that I thought were fun little anecdotes. They were like smaller things, the smaller topics, but I liked it. One, which we didn't really get into, was starting with power users. I liked how they started with power users. I was like, oh, that's probably actually really smart in healthcare generally to start with the power users.
Define the power user, like the power customer of the early adopter type companies or the employees themselves?
Power customer of the early adopter.
Yeah.
And then the second was, he talked about it, but I think it's just like, it's becoming so crystal clear to me that in healthcare it's required, which is fundraising is a search process, not a persuasion process. Like never try to convince people that your healthcare business is worth it. Only find the people who like spend all your time who already believe that your business is worth it.
Right. Which I didn't ask this, and I kind of wish I had. I think I'll always say that every single discussion, which is, how do you do that up front? He said we qualify a lot, but qualifying still requires that first conversation, which requires that series of introductions to get to that first conversation. Can you do anything beforehand? I'm sure there's some.
What is the pre-qualifying?
Right. Is that reading their blogs, looking at their portfolio, talking to existing founders? Like, what are the tactics you could use to pre-qualify to build that hit list of believers or likely believers? I love that. I think the other thing that's becoming abundantly clear is that if you're building a healthcare company, as much as it's an overused word in startups, but truly the creative hustle is required. And I know that's like every founder needs to have it, but we're talking about navigating a very complex system.
Yeah. And this is a guy who actually had a ton of experience navigating a complex system, both personally as well as professionally. Like, I mean, building plans with McKinsey is not like,
right.
He was deep in it. He understood it. Like, he got it.
Right.
And he still had to have that creative hustle because it's really hard to navigate the system.
Yeah. So the intentionality behind it, I think, is a good lesson. Yeah, I thought it was a great story.
It was very cool.